Erin O'Connor is a screenwriter, UC Berkeley grad, and Michigan English PhD whose work brings sharp insight and compelling narratives to the screen. With Morris Black, she is co-founder of The Story Incubator. Welcome, Erin.
Thanks, Max. It's great to be here.
So you might say our culture in the United States is broken. There are many ways in which we can describe that brokenness, but I think everyone pretty much gets it intuitively, and I know you do.
Yeah.
So your work at the Story Incubator centers on cultural repair. What does that guiding philosophy do to the kind of projects you guys want to develop?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I were to take a couple steps back, what I would say is that I'm going to give a characterization of what needs to be repaired, and how we understand the brokenness and what it looks like to us right now, Morris and me. And the reason we founded the Story Incubator is that we have sort of shattered into warring factions. And everybody is shouting their point of view. Everybody is shouting what they think should happen politically, and we're not getting anything done. So on a certain level, it kind of doesn't matter what side you're on because we can't get anything done. And until we can figure out how we can come together across all those differences and think differently about one another and the work of problem solving itself, we're not going to get anywhere except further into the doom loop that we're in. And a doom loop is something where it doesn't matter what the other side does, it's just going to alienate the opposition even more. And we're there. And we're in a stage of something that is called lethal mass partisanship by political scientists. And we're, the lethal
Say that
part is
again?
lethal mass partisanship. We're basically committing suicide. Suicide by political partisanship. And that's a thing that democracies do. It's not unique to us. John Adams said there's never been a democracy that didn't die by suicide. And there weren't a lot of democracies when he said that, but it's sort of a predictive statement at the same time. And it's an interesting thing to look at. So from our point of view, we're like, well, this is a thing that happens within democracies. It's a political sort of process that is runaway and that is now affecting our entire culture. So is there a different way to approach the issue? Because politics is not the answer. Politics, I think, deepens it. We come from a lifetime of caring about stories and storytelling. So, of course, we're oriented around that. And what fascinates us and the reason why we created the Story Incubator is that stories work on the brain in a different way. Stories inhabit our imaginations and our lives and our relationships differently than argument and debate and political positioning do. To make a long answer much shorter, stories allow us to accomplish things that can't be accomplished in other ways, and they allow us to specifically do the things we need to do right now. They allow us to widen our sense of belonging with one another, to imagine our way into the lives and emotions of people who are different from us, to enlarge our sense of empathy, and to believe that we will not fall apart into a million pieces if we make space for different kinds of lives and different kinds of points of view. We are not going to die if we do that. Our brain thinks that we are when we're in the political space, but storytelling allows us to make an end run around that, and to sort of soften the process of coming together across differences, which is what we've got to do.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
at a sort of 30,000 foot level, I think
Mhm. Mhm.
more and more people are coming to agree with that. Yeah,
Mhm.
we kind of get sucked into this kind of partisanship, this conflict, this
Yeah.
polarization. We
Yeah.
also know that people kind of come to the table with certain kinds of what we might call deal breakers. The idea is, okay, this is a line you can't cross, or this
Mhm.
is a line you can cross in the case of
Mhm.
immigration, which is a big debate right
Mhm.
now. Um,
Mhm.
and there's disagreement over that, right? Or
Yeah.
who may
Yeah.
cross the line, as it were.
Yeah.
Um, and so these big issues that seem to really tear people apart, particularly when we start to go deeper into some of the dynamics behind the whys and wherefores of people's positions on it, which
Mhm.
can be as as heartfelt as they are cynical.
Yeah.
So, when you're dealing with deal breakers, how do you see story as a kind of reconciliation medium in terms of showing what's possible in terms
Mhm.
of living together despite deal breakers?
Yeah, I think there are a variety of ways that stories can do that, but I'll just give you an example. And it comes from the deal breaker space. And this is a film that I actually wrote. It's called Miss Virginia, and it tells the true story of a woman named Virginia Walden Ford, who for a number of years in the late '90s and in the early 2000s found herself in the position of wanting to change things that were baked into the structure of education. She had a son who was she was kind of losing him to the streets. He was going to a failing school. They lived in a zip code where that was the only school he could go to. He was getting into trouble. The streets were more attractive and interesting than the schools, and she could see what his future was going to look like. And she couldn't afford to just move to a different school district. She couldn't afford to put him in a private school. And so, what she was faced with was, I'm going to have to change the law so that there's a support structure built into the law that allows me to send my kid to a school where he can actually get an education, graduate, and have a future. So what I just described is somebody, who's operating within a very hot button issue in our society. And the word that we use for this, the phrase is school choice. And it goes right to the heart of what you just described around deal breakers. This is an issue. Like, how should we fix the broken educational system? This is an issue that has been handled in a hostile, hot potato, combative way for decades in government. And Democrats look at it one way, Republicans look at it a different way, and there's just a lot of money and power and argument circulating, and it's never been solved. And meanwhile, generations of kids sort of get flushed down the toilet while all the political fighting happens. So here comes Virginia Walden Ford. She changes the law. She leads a coalition of parents to change the law, to create an opportunity scholarship program for at-risk and impoverished kids to be able to pay for tuition to private schools. That could have been a very controversial thing, and it was for some people because of how politicized the issue is, and it shouldn't be. And so when we had the opportunity to tell that story, we said, how can we talk about this issue in a way that doesn't just feed the same old arguments about who should be controlling education and whether all the money should be public money and so on? How can we tell this story in a way that just bounces out of that particular intractable, intransigent issue? And for this particular issue and this particular story, what I landed on was, let's focus on things that bring the thing out of politics and into the core issues that matter. So, a mother's love for her son. If you're a parent and you see your kid stuck in a failing school, what are you going to do? Everybody can relate to a mother's love for her son and her decision to say, I will not let the system destroy my son. I will not let that happen. I don't care what I have to do. That's apolitical, right? The other thing that we chose to lean into was righteousness, basically equal opportunity. That is guaranteed to everybody who's born into citizenship in this country. And you look at how the public education system is structured, and there is not equal opportunity there. If you live in the wrong zip code, you're going to go to a school that doesn't have chalk, but it does have metal detectors, and you're really not likely to be going to Yale at the end of that, right? And right? And so, um, really leaning into this is a human rights issue, it's a civil rights issue, and we can all understand that. Let's stop dumping our children's futures so that we can have fights to score political points. That's an example of a way to take a really hot button issue that people feel very powerfully about, where there's a lot of money and a lot of, stuff, underlying the positions that people take, and say, no, let's get real and let's look at this in a way that is rational and really foundational, and find a way where we can all agree. And so it was an attempt to kind of transcend the back and forth and help us all get on the same page and sort of get right with, what's needed.
Forgive this brief interruption, but I suspect you're here because you're disillusioned with legacy politics. If you're a creative, a builder, or an innovator, you might be ready to win funding. Through Human Respect Labs, you can get up to $30,000 to fund your next creative project. But not just any project. We're looking for 6 kinds of builders: video storytellers, community builders, writers, entrepreneurs, strategists, and innovators, any of which should be dedicated to human liberation. That means making government obsolete. Why? We know too much energy goes into politics, but not enough goes into real solutions. So if you're a freedom lover and you have a project idea that promotes peace, autonomy, and voluntary collaboration, we want to hear from you. Apply now at humanrespectlabs.org. That's humanrespectlabs.org. Criticize by creating. There are 2 forces at work in some of this sort of partisan rancor. Well, there are many more than that, but 2 come to the fore in my mind right now. One is this idea that we need to preach to the other side, and we have a series of talking points that we have to, enumerate or bullet and go through a checklist of these talking points in order to sort of make our case to the other side. And what often happens in that is that it comes across as preachy, right? We don't really like that. We don't like to be preached to,
Right.
and it almost as if we dig in our heels in this regard. The other dynamic there is that by virtue of our membership in some tribal coalitional group, we have our own set of moralisms. We have our own checklist about how things ought to be done. And so what we get this dynamic of seeking to impose it or force it down the throat of the other side. And more issues tend to be kind of falling out that way, where there might be a third way, there might be an interesting compromise, there might be some sort of instantiation of human pluralism that would solve the problem and everybody essentially get what they want within their communities or particular groups or what have you. But first you have to sort of dispel that preachiness.
Yes.
So how do you do that? How do you it sounds like this impact-driven storytelling, in some sense, it dispels the preachiness, but how
Yes.
in particular?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And absolutely, if you want to tell a story that actually works on people, don't think that people are so stupid and so malleable that you can just use a story as a Trojan horse to kind of shove your talking points down their throat and they'll go, "Oh, now I see the light. I'm changed." That's not how it works. And it doesn't work for the same reason it doesn't work in politics. And what we have learned at this point is that humans experience aggressive argument or even reasoned argument. Anything that kind of comes at you with "I'm right and you're wrong," even if I back it up with footnotes and bullet points and citations, if I'm basically letting you know that you're wrong, your brain is going to believe that I am attacking you, and it's going to experience it as if I'm physically mauling you. It's a threat to the survival of your self-concept. for me to come at you with how you see the world. And what has been shown scientifically is that if I do that, you're far more likely, even if I prove that you're wrong and you kind of know that I did, you're far more likely to double down on your position than you are to admit that you're wrong. We can't admit we're wrong. We will die. If we admit we're wrong, we think that's true. Um, so um, this can't be the mindset. The mindset for positive storytelling that actually moves people has to be one of respect and genuine capacity to hold multiple viewpoints. Um, if you want to tell a story that really starts a conversation and gets people to see things from a new point of view, you can't be preaching, you can't be oversimplifying. Um, the issues that you're presenting. You also can't demonize or mock or caricature people and points of view that you personally don't like, because everybody will smell that,
You
and
can
it
do it
doesn't work
within
for
your own
anybody.
affiliation group.
Yeah, you can do it there. You can preach to the choir and just
Right.
spend your time spinning your wheels on stuff you've already established. But if you want to tell a story that actually reaches across the aisle or beyond the choir or however you want to describe it, it's got to be one that truly holds space for the totality of the subject matter that you're taking up, that respects the characters that have been mobilized, which doesn't mean that they all have to be good, but that they have to be treated with respect. And a great example of this is the television show The Wire and what David Simon was able to do. And he started off trying to get people to pay attention to how the drug war worked and how things were going on in Baltimore, just as a journalist. And he just wasn't getting anybody to pay attention. Finally, took years, took a bunch of iterations, but The Wire gets made as a television show. And the great thing about The Wire is you get a look, like you get 360 view, right, of the drug war in
Oh,
Baltimore.
yeah.
Right? And so you know what it's like for the cops on the street and the whole, police system right up to the chief. You know what it's like for the dealers from the corner boys all the way up to, the kingpins. You know what it's like for the people living in the projects whose lives have been hijacked by this situation. You know what it's like in the schools. You know what, in a tangential way, it's like on the docks. Like, all of these things. And you get a lot of points of view. Every last one of them is handled with dignity. The moral complexity of all of it is laid out in front of us, and we are intelligent enough as viewers to appreciate that. And we come away from it saying, gee, this is amazingly complex. As we contemplate it further, as we attempt to deal with this in our society, let's hold an understanding of the complexity of that instead
Right,
of,
and
I'm going to
only
come at
storytelling
you.
is gonna do that.
Only storytelling is going to do that. And it's not just that it's a representation of complexity because there's a bunch of characters. It has to do with how our brain responds to story. And what we're learning now that we can put people in MRI machines and then watch their brains as they're watching film and listening to stories and things like this is that when we get really engaged with a story, we actually merge with it. So if we're, totally following Stringer Bell, and we love Stringer Bell, and we're watching what he's going through, it's not just that we are enjoying witnessing Stringer Bell, we're experiencing what he's experiencing.
As if
Our
we were Stringer
brains,
Bell.
yes, our brains live the life of the character. We become the character, and it's such a great way of being able to see in a measurable scientific way how identification with a character works and how it is that story truly can enlarge our sense of who we are, right? We're literally shifting and becoming, and we can become somebody who is not the same sex, not the same race, has totally different beliefs, lives in a different part of the world, does something totally different from our experience. We can become them for the scope of that story. It enlarges our sense of possibility. It reduces barriers to association. Will and Grace was on TV for, however many years in the early to mid 2000s. Before it started to air, the American people were like, gay marriage? Absolutely not. No. Will and Grace comes on into the living room on network TV once a week for a few years. And we see Grace with her gay roommate and his gay friend, and we are all friends with all of them for a number of years. And then, boom, gay marriage, no problem. American people are totally fine with it because we're friends with the people we're seeing on TV in our living room once
Interesting.
a week.
Okay. So
Hmm.
we've got lots of good examples to play with now.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think, you might not be able to produce any kind of social science that demonstrates that Will and Grace was, the primary factor in a sea change in
Right.
American psychology on the issue of gay marriage. And that's
Right.
fine. Let's just
Right.
stipulate that it worked, that it
Hmm.
was a sort of a mass psychological evolution, right?
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
slowly internalized and people are like, "Eh." And then as a matter of fact, throughout what we might call the age of radical social justice fundamentalism or woke from,
Hmm.
2014 roughly to 2024, it seemed like ordinary gays and lesbians were abandoned,
Hmm.
in many
Hmm.
respects by their own movement,
Hmm.
intersectional movement.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
never mind that. We know we can stipulate at least for this conversation that Will and Grace did have that effect or contributed mightily to that effect. What's interesting to me about The Wire, the example, and I would encourage everybody to watch that,
Yeah.
is that it didn't really generate any durable policy changes that um that were any good, frankly.
Yeah.
It left us
Yeah.
with a sense of this is a hopelessly complex
Yeah.
issue, and there was kind of a nihilism that it left in you, and
Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant. I actually think that that might be my favorite show of all time. Just
Yeah.
stunningly good.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but here's the thing. Miss Virginia, again, we
Hmm.
don't have the social science we can marshal to see that there are states falling like dominoes and being more open to, school choice kind of, policies in those states.
Hmm.
And nevertheless, I think one could argue that it's really hard to hate that picture when you watch it, no matter
Hmm.
what your priors are, no matter what your
Yeah.
ideological priors.
Yeah.
So, there's a difference there. I like the David Simon example, The Wire, but I do think, there is a sense of the two other examples of getting something substantive over the finish line.
Yeah.
So the questions there are, first, why is that not a Trojan horse, as you put it, from
Hmm.
a strategic standpoint?
Hmm.
And two, what is the magic sauce, whether and to what extent it is a Trojan horse, right?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
the secret sauce there for durable, sort of psychological, cultural change upstream from policy?
Yeah. I mean, those are the $1 million questions. And that's what Morris and I are really seeking to isolate and identify, both through looking at examples, kind of sociologically, but also through, to the extent that we're able to do it as a very small, two-person nonprofit running neurobiological studies of watching the brain on stories. So, a couple of things. I think asking a story to change policy, like that's the holy grail. And it's not generally the thing that story is best at doing, but we can point to moments when it has done that. And so it's like, there are people who are very interested in leveraging story for, let's get this law or let's shift this policy. It's great when that can happen. I don't think that's ultimately what story is best suited for. What it's best suited for is showing, us things that we personally can do and be. I think that because of all of the examples we have of times when film and television accidentally made large swaths of people do stuff. Like Will and Grace wasn't created so that we would soften the American people's attitudes and then we could change the law. It was created because it was felt to be something that maybe could work on television in a commercial way. And there were a lot of people that really doubted that going into Will and Grace. Like, can the people handle this? They loved it. So it was just, it was a sitcom among many. It happened to have a certain effect. Other examples where you can just strip the politics out are when the X-Files was airing in, what was it, sort of the late 90s, and Gillian Anderson is there on TV as this amazing person who, I think she has an MD, and she's also obviously working for the government undercover to figure out all the paranormal things with Scully. There was it made an enormous impact on young girls who were sort of heading into teenagerness. And a lot of them said, you can do that? You can be like Gillian Anderson. You can be beautiful and smart and have all the degrees and have this adventurous life. And I'm going
And
to be
know that
like
the
her.
truth is out there.
The truth is out there, and I'm going to be like her. And it was a so kind of a recognized thing at the time that girls were doing this. So the Gina Davis Institute got interested in the question of, did girls just lose track of that, or what happened to those girls when they grew up? And they did a study of women like now who are working in STEM, who would have been, tweens and early teens when they were watching the X-Files. And a very significant percentage of those women in STEM today say, yeah, it was Scully.
Wow.
Scully is,
That's too cool.
Scully gave me the idea and I stayed. And it's called the Scully effect. So accident, but this is monkey see, monkey do, right? I see it on TV. Oh, that could be me too, because we already know my brain just became that thing. And
Yeah.
so now I know I can. That's the thing that
Yeah.
story's great at, not let's go change a law.
If you care about freedom and you're tired of partisan bumper stickers, welcome to Underthrow. This show explores liberation through creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. We talk with subversive thinkers and radical innovators about what actually works, how ideas become experiments, and experiments become the shoots of civilization. If you're interested in building something outside the usual power structures, subscribe to Underthrow. That's really interesting. So
Yeah.
a couple things occur to me. One is
Yeah.
René Girard, the
Mm-hmm.
philosopher, the French
Mm-hmm.
philosopher who ended up at Stanford, writes about this phenomenon called mimesis, which is different from
Yes.
memetics. Memetics is different,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
also interesting for this conversation, perhaps. But mimesis is the tendency to ape other people, monkey see, monkey do,
Yes.
and and
Yes.
and when we can start to put ourselves in the position of some imaginary figure that becomes a kind of aspirational self. That is
Yeah.
really interesting that the Scully effect
Mm-hmm.
had on women in STEM. Like, wow. I
Yep.
mean, that's kind of blows
Yeah.
my hair back.
Yeah.
And I go back. So look, I admit, Erin, that I'm not a partisan, but
Mm-hmm.
I am steeped in my own sense of ideology. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My own ideology. Um, people who watch the show know that I'm into, human freedom, radical
Mm-hmm.
decentralization of power, and so
Mm-hmm.
on. And these, to the extent that we can begin to build systems, liberatory systems, we get more freedom, and people can
Yeah.
also self-organize into situations where their communities are constrained freedoms a little bit, but it's easier to leave those communities if they're not working out for you. So it's a sort
Yeah.
of like a markets and governance. Now, all this sounds like, just so much ideological claptrap and, you
Mhm.
know, me sort of thinking in terms of my ideals. Is there, is there a way to show a better world, or does it kind of have to be a person that we look up to? Or
Mhm.
is it that you can have a person having an effect on their environments such
Yeah.
that this kind of speculative but interesting ideas about societal change can emerge from those environments?
Yeah. Yeah,
Is
those are
that a kitty
great
cat?
questions. That's a kitty cat. I mean, I'm trying to keep her from joining the podcast, but I may not be able
Hey,
to. This is Jenny Wren, and welcome to Max's podcast. Move on.
hi, kitty, kitty.
Yeah. So
No
I'll
worries.
tell you about a study that gets at all of this, and then I'll give you an example. So there's a magically wonderful neuroeconomist named Paul Zak, who
Mhm.
studies the neurobiology of storytelling. And a few years ago, he did a study where he had two groups of people, and he showed each one a short film. And the subject matter was basically the same. There was a dad and his son's a cancer patient, and they go to the zoo. In one of these short stories, they just go to the zoo and they wander around, and you just kind of watch them for a while. In the other, um, shaping has taken place, and we have a kind of a three-act mini story. And there's a conflict, and there's a goal, and there's some resistance, and there's striving, and then there's a resolution at the end. So it's the same sort of material, but a kind of traditional Joseph Campbell call to action and leap into, the void, and the solving of the issue happens. So our groups watched this. At the end, he did two things. One is he measured the level of oxytocin in the blood. Oxytocin crosses the blood-brain barrier, so the levels in the blood are going to tell you something about the level in the brain. And this is the love hormone and the empathy hormone, and it's something that gets turned on when we get into story. So measuring oxytocin will tell you how involved in the story we were. Um, the levels of oxytocin for the people that watched the structured story way higher than the people that just kind of watched the footage that had the same kind of ingredients but wasn't shaped. Then everybody got some funny money, and he said, would you like to give money to causes? um, and what he found is that the group that saw the structured story and had the high oxytocin level gave more money and gave to more causes. So we have a direct link between telling a great story that has the shape and gets you involved chemically, and being activated to do something in the world to make it a better place.
And
Boom.
now the giving doesn't even need to be a giving story. It need only
No,
be an oxytocin milk milking agent or whatever, right?
that's right. It doesn't have to model giving. It can just get you so moved and get your empathy and your desire to like benefit humanity, right? You know
Mhm.
that feeling, right? You get it. I think we also get it when we go see like Top Gun Maverick. You come out of there, you're like, yeah, I want to, we can do great things, right? That's what it is. So that's sort of the chemistry of it. And now and then, because I think again, it's just when it happens, it's mostly by accident, but it can happen in a big way. So, the film Dallas Buyers Club.
Mm.
And this tells the true story of a cowboy living in Texas in the 80s, who is diagnosed with full-blown AIDS at a time when there really wasn't much in the way of treatment, and there was an enormous amount of stigma. And this guy himself is very homophobic, and really is disgusted that he has this diagnosis and doesn't want people to know. And so, and he sort of starts in that area, but he's dying, and he decides he wants to live. He can't access treatment in the US, goes to Mexico, gets a bunch of supplements, they work. He smuggles them across the border, and he opens a private association in Dallas where you can pay a membership fee and access these non-FDA approved supplements, and take them and get whatever benefit there is to get from it. Now, of course, the FDA doesn't like this and shuts them down. These are not FDA approved things. Um, and the film tells the story of how he fights the government and he loses. Um, but it's also telling the story of how he's benefited from taking proactive action and from sharing the benefits and results of those actions with others through creating a kind of private enterprise where people can freely and peacefully come together to basically do commerce, but also, keep themselves alive and create health, right? Um, it was just a story. It did very well. It was made for 5 million, did 50 million at the box office. Somebody at the Goldwater Institute saw this movie and said, aha, we have an opportunity. And they wrote model legislation
The
for
right to
what has
try?
come to be the right to try. Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Wow.
Right. So you tell me
Wow.
what the right to try is.
Yeah, so, I mean, while you were telling me this, I'm thinking, "Okay, this sounds like it's gonna lead people or at least prime someone to think about right to try," which is
Yeah.
basically legislation that allows people who have terminal illnesses to try drugs that are not yet approved by the FDA. And so if you
Yes.
have a special permission, through physicians who demonstrate that your illness is terminal and that without trying it, you're gonna die anyway, you can try
Yeah.
it.
There you go. That is what that's the the gap or the absence in the film. That's the thing that isn't on the books yet, and that's preventing people in the movie from accessing care. And the Goldwater Institute said this is an opportunity. They wrote model legislation to create the right to try. And if you think about that, all it really is an expansion of freedom, right, for all Americans, allowing you to try to save your life if you're facing death. And when we are promising ourselves life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we that there's the most important moment to be able to pursue life is when you have a death sentence, right? So they write this model legislation and they go out to the states. It's bipartisan. They call it Dallas Buyers Club laws. And they go into the legislatures, they have screenings, and it's just like wildfire. I think Colorado was first. And in the space of about 4 years, over 40 states passed bipartisan right to try laws with just no problem at all. And we're doing it at a period of high polarization. This starts in like 2014, I think, goes through 2018. Think about what's going on in Washington and so on during those years. We're not getting along very well. But we're getting along on this. And then in 2018, Donald Trump signs it into federal law, and the expansion of human freedom for people with terminal diagnosis is now a right, in the
Yeah.
US because of that movie. Yeah.
So, what's interesting to me about that is that there is a very tidy logic to 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 the idea, and I'm imagining coming up to some partisan who, I mean, look, let's face it, big pharma and the whole apparatus of, testing for sometimes a decade long testing
Mhm.
for efficacy and safety, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Also does a heck of a good job of shoring up incumbents in the pharma space, right?
Yeah.
They like
Yeah.
the regulations, and so the regulators end up in a kind of a weird, unholy alliance with the pharma companies to make sure that any crazy little startups don't come and, steal all their customers. And
Yeah.
this is regulatory capture 101.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if you just used the logic of this, and approached a partisan or a politician or even a pharma company who's looking after its own interests, you might just say, "Look, with this law, they might die because it's unsafe. But
Mhm.
without this or with this drug, they might die because the drug is unsafe. but without the drug, they're surely going to die because they're terminal.
Mhm.
That is a
Mhm.
very logos oriented thing.
Yeah.
But what you do with pathos and mythos, which is the application of those vectors in the storytelling process, with Dallas Buyers Club being a great example, is you start to prime people's, hearts and minds for looking at things from a different direction. And
Yeah.
and if nothing else, wanting to be on the team that helped people. I
That's right.
noticed two things about Dallas Buyers Club that are interesting, and maybe this reveals something about your modus operandi in this. I don't know. But it strikes me that there is a message in Dallas Buyers Club that government regulation is actually causing people to die,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
government bad, the right wingers go, see, government regulation, it's hurting people. The left wingers see, just as or more empathically, I see someone who's hurting. They're part of a marginalized community, especially in the 80s, where gays were, and gays with diseases were
Mhm.
absolutely personae non,
Mhm.
non grata, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So here we have the sort of traditional right and traditional left perspectives both
Yes.
coming together in the same film
Yes.
that
Mhm.
in some weird way brings them together. Is that
That's right.
part and parcel to this? The world speaks in riddles, markets, politics, power, the very nature of consciousness itself. But what if there were guides, a secret fellowship dedicated to reading the signs, to building bridges between the seen and the unseen? The gray robes operate in the space others fear or cannot comprehend. We map the territory between spiritual awakening and practical revolution, between ancient wisdom and radical innovation. 12 dimensions guide us. One mission impels us. Find out more at grayrobes.org. That's grayrobes.org.
That is huge and absolutely central to what we're doing. So much so that we actually conducted a study of the neurobiology of Dallas Buyers Club. It's called The Brain on Dallas Buyers Club. And about a year and a half ago, I think it was, we worked with a company to source 80 people. I think it was in LA or Orange County, and they came together in a proper movie theater in the evening, and they were evenly divided. There were an equal number of conservatives, moderates, and liberals at the screening. And nobody had seen Dallas Buyers Club before. And what we did was we worked with Paul Zach's company, which has figured out ways to use fitness trackers to measure how immersed you are in a story. Um, we worked with his company to uh, basically watch all of those liberal, moderate, and conservative brains as they watched Dallas Buyers Club. We have second by second data for each of those groups for the entire, I think it's an hour and 40-minute film. And
Mm.
that's allowing us to answer that question. Like, is this one movie or is it three movies? Right? Um, how does this film get people who are otherwise not on the same page, not only to come to the same conclusion at the end, but to feel that it's totally fine and also imperative to work together to create the kind of change that we did see? And it was so fast. And I think what you've just described is very much the hypothesis that we have, that no matter what point of view you come from politically, there is a place to anchor yourself philosophically and characterologically in the film. So as you say, if you are coming from a more right of center perspective, you can follow the character of Ron Woodruff as he realizes that um, Government is not gonna help him stay alive. He has to, come up with a private solution. He has to start a business. He has to be an entrepreneur. This works, and then the government shuts him down again. That's an argument that really, really works for free market folks. If you're coming from a different point of view, you've got the social justice narrative, which absolutely tracks the same thing. You are probably more interested in the character of Rayon, who was played by Jared Leto, and is the trans woman that he partners with to found the Buyers Club, and they work together. And this is more of a social justice story about people who are discarded by society and now by medicine, and left to die. And here is a solution that is being offered that is not coming from uh, governmental or public places, and is actually working for people, and allowing life and quality of life to 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 return. And so nobody has to be wrong. Getting back to an earlier part of our conversation, nobody has to be in the wrong, um, in order to come to the conclusion at the end of Dallas Buyers Club that we really need to get the government out of people's way when they have a terminal diagnosis. Um, Everybody has a way to enter that position, from within their own belief system. The other thing is that if you poll most Americans are not living in the extreme right or the extreme left, where all of the tribal nastiness that dominates our news cycle is. Most Americans are in the middle, and they're watching from the sidelines, feeling that their culture has been hijacked and their political system has been hijacked and their quality of life has been hijacked. And if you ask the average American, what do you believe in? Um, Regardless of how they vote, they say, I really think government should be out of our business. I really think that I should have, and the people around me should have maximal personal freedom, just as long as it doesn't get in other people's way, right? I really think that we ought to be able to group together to solve our own problems. I really think that entrepreneurship and small businesses are the bomb, and we should be able to do a lot of that. And regulation and red tape are rotten. And I'm either living with a lot of it or I know people who are. That's where everybody lives. And they're also like, I am sick of the cage fight. I'm sick of the mudslinging. Our news cycle suggests that's what we're all doing now. What most of us are doing are going, OMG, I don't, this is not us. I want to collaborate with my neighbor to make it better.
It would seem like this was really I guess you could say, the common sense way of looking at things. It's sort of like common
Yes.
sense Americanism,
Yep.
because that's, if you go back to Alexis de Tocqueville, he came over, wrote a book about us, and that's what he saw. Basically, what you saw, that we were an industrious people, that if there was a problem, we started a club. And these clubs
Yep.
grew into great, industries of good
Yep.
sometimes with some of these
Yeah.
mutual aid societies. But whatever it was, he saw we were a nation of joiners. That is sort of the
Yes.
phrase. And
Mm-hmm.
that leave us alone, let us do things our way, let us do our things our way as a community and so on, rather than the choice. It's a choice between, this, dirigisme, which is just, you know, industrial policy to the nth degree, where the United States has to push a bunch of money into, like, brute forcing some industries into existence or subsidizing
Mm-hmm.
them until they're absolutely corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or or the reverse, they corrupt those who rain those resources
Yeah.
down on them. Or it is, everything has to be the one true way, right? My set of morals, my moral priors, my conception of the
Mm-hmm.
good, where it's not usually harming anyone, whether if you went one way or the other, and you can self-organize into communities that do things one way or another if you prefer the other. But everything tends to be this titanic tug of war. And then, Erin, you see that they're fighting over it, right? They're making fun of each other, they're fighting over it. And this is good TV. You'll get some of these shows where they'll actually pit them against each other for our entertainment. And you can just go through the social media posts one after the other and watch this
Yeah.
passing show of conflict.
Yeah.
And it's not it's a form of excitement. I wouldn't say it's all that spiritually nourishing. In fact, it's not at
No,
all.
it's toxic. Yeah.
But what you're describing, and I think some people who are really cynical would say, "Oh, this is just another form of propaganda." But what it strikes me that you're doing is it's almost like propaganda for peace among partisans,
Hmm.
a means of healing the country, and that's
Yeah.
really quite interesting. So I want to acknowledge that. But it also seems like you guys have developed a methodology,
Hmm.
um, or a method. I don't know which is the right term, but in any case, a method whereby you can start to build this into the architecture of a script, say,
Yeah.
to the extent that you can talk about it in an overview without giving away your trade secrets. Um, or because I think
Hmm.
absolutely Hollywood writers should be flocking to you and Morris to get an education in this, not only in what works for the Paul Zak stuff, the neurophysiology
Hmm.
response, but also just the technique that gives rise to that in sort of evolved human beings. What is an overview of the method, if you can talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, and we're still defining how we really ultimately want to talk about it because it's like it's a method that's not a method, right? There's it's rules that aren't rules. But I think what it ultimately comes down to is storytelling is an inherently powerful uh, technology that we evolved for. Um, we are wired for story in the same way we're wired for sleep and food and sex. Sleep, food, and sex, we love it. We want it. It's fun. All feels good, right? Story is the same thing if you think about it. And it's a weird thing because you would think it's not on the same level as food. It's story, it's entertainment. But we're always telling stories. We're always seeking stories. That's how we entertain ourselves. If we're bored or we're worried, we make up stories about what other people might be thinking. It's just how we operate. It's a very strange thing to think about. And where I'm going with this is um, it's absolutely critical if you are a storyteller to understand that this, not a game, it's not entertainment, it's power. It is a machine that you're driving when you create a story. And you have an obligation, also an opportunity to understand a lot more than most people do about how the story that you're shaping um, is actually going to work on people. You need to understand why brains want stories, how they respond to them, what are the things they can and can't do. And we've talked about that in the course of this conversation. And then you can make intelligent, creative decisions from inside that awareness. Like imitation works, mimicry is really good, right? Creating storylines that are complex enough to allow space for competing viewpoints, but maybe moves them toward a shared solution, the way that Dallas Buyers Club does. Great. That's a way that things can work. There are other examples and other ways, but noticing the places where we've stumbled across stories that move people, um, and reasoning backward from that to what are the core principles for storytelling that really is high impact. And also, what are the things that I'm not going to do? I'm not going to preach. I'm not going to, make fun of viewpoints that I don't agree with. I'm not gonna like demonize the conservative or demonize the progressive or demonize the capitalist or demonize the communist or whatever it is. I'm just not gonna do it. I'm going to tell a story that isn't cheating like that. Those are the starting points. And then something that we do with the folks that we work with in our lab is think about, who is the story for? Who do you want to watch it? What do you want to happen? Um, do you do you want to kind of open people's minds to something that they're not open to? Do you want to show them an experience they've never thought was possible? Do you want to start a conversation? Do you want to take something that's really complicated and like lay it out in such a like compelling, sticky way that they can't not talk about it afterwards? What do you want? You know? And from there, make decisions about things like, who is your protagonist? Um, what happens? Like, what do you want to see on the screen that will support that effect? One of the things that I talk with people a lot about is, if you're in a feature film, um, there's a danger to having multiple perspectives, and a lot of people want to have a lot of perspectives going on, particularly because we see this in prestige TV. But if you've got 90 minutes in a film, and we know that what the brain's trying to do is find somebody to be, don't ask it to shift gears constantly. Give us somebody to be and take us all the way through. And if you do that well, you get to name another example, something like Schindler's List. You get Oscar
Mhm.
Schindler. We'll be Oscar Schindler, and we'll start off being a fellow traveler of a very, very bad regime, but he's making money. It's not about him. He's just making money. And then realizing halfway through, uh-oh, I'm complicit. Uh-oh, what am I going to do? Can he have the strength to admit he was wrong? Can he change? Can he risk something? We get to be that, you know?
Yeah, I think this is really powerful stuff. Um I've been thinking, I'm putting together a project, a pilot for young
Mm-hmm.
men, right? To really, I would consider it a sort of multimodal training program for
Mm-hmm.
men,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because men have kind of, they've been demonized and forgotten a little bit over the
Yep.
last couple of decades, and
Yeah.
we want healthy masculinity to
Yes.
return to the scene, right?
Yes.
Not just sort of the protector provider archetype, but virtue practitioners
Mm-hmm.
working towards
Mm-hmm.
excellence, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I asked myself, okay, at this age, are you the right guy, Max? Because I tend to see things in terms of the hero's journey frame. The old Jungian thing is the puer, the hero, and the senex. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
passing out of the hero stage, and these are stages, the young man, the hero, and the senex. And I'm passing into the senex stage. I'm getting gray in my beard. I'm growing a beard and it's getting gray, right? So
Mm-hmm.
more and more I'm coming to identify with the Gandalfs or the Obi-Wans in story.
Mm-hmm.
How can
Mm-hmm.
I become that guide to young men to make them the center of the story, bring them into this program? And now you've kind of answered this question for me, with the one exception. And this goes back to my curiosity and feeling of a little bit of a hopelessness about how everything online these days is moving towards the short, and the short is the gotcha.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So and so owns someone, and someone, where everything is based on conflict. And of course, good stories
Mm-hmm.
have to have conflict. They have to have tension. I have, a boss of mine who wanted, at one point asked me if I'd be willing to write a story that depicted an ideal world, and that was based on, his personal philosophy. And I said, well, that's a story where nothing happens. Nobody will watch it. It won't be interesting. We've either got to destroy that world or we got to fight to see it being created, one
Yeah.
way or the other. But in any case,
Yeah. Yeah.
just going back quickly to the thing, it's like people want to see shorts that have to do with conflict, or shorts that have to do with, humor or embarrassment. And those things are, part of it. But if you're into politics at all, or political theory, or anything along those lines, most of what you're going to get is sort of some partisan owning another partisan, and we sort of stay in these bubbles with that.
Mhm.
But what you're proposing is very powerful, yet it strikes me that in some sort of brief promotion, or even in these online things where you're just kind of doing like this, watching one thing after another in shorts, that can't possibly work. You don't have time to
Mhm.
develop the
Yeah.
characters. You don't have time to.
Nope.
So, is this a long form thing? And are there ways to do it in vignettes, short pieces, or is it mostly this going to be something where you have to commit the time, you have to commit to long form, it has to be a movie or a show or something like that?
Mhm. That's really the question. And I think underwriting this conversation right now is a kind of mutual acute awareness of what has happened to attention span because of online life. And studies are coming out now, kind of showing or documenting for us the obvious, which is that the scrolling life and just seeing little bits is absolutely shattering people's capacity to pay attention and is extremely destructive for the developing brain, which needs to be learning something that is long form for a developing brain, which is going to be different, but they need something that's more extended. I think if you have to find a compromise and you feel that you've got to work within something that's shorter form because of budgets and the way that online life works, serialize something. So maybe at any given time it's a minute on Instagram, but it's part of a longer thing that builds over time, and we get to know somebody and we get to be with them, and every time we see them, it's adding a layer to the relationship that we're having with you, or if it's a scripted thing, that the characters or whatever, and it will build over time into something. But I love what you're saying about wanting to do something in the storytelling zone for masculinity and I presume also boyhood. And there's so many examples we have in recent times of it's not just the Scully effect. It's also, if you look at the Hunger Games, girls saw Jennifer Lawrence with her bow and arrow. They said, "I'm going to be an archer." 10 years later, they're still doing archery. The Queen's Gambit comes out. Girls see, Anya Taylor Joy, like, doing boss chess, and they're like, "I too shall do boss chess," and they go and do chess. So I feel like on a really simple level, um, do that. Come up with a compelling story or set of stories that give boys a way to be awesome, ultimate boys.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you know, give
That's wonderful, and
because
that one
yeah,
goes directly to my project, so thank you for that. People, I'm
yeah.
sure, pay you, 3 or $400 an hour for that kind of advice, or at least they should. So thank you so much for that.
Thank
Erin
you.
O'Connor, it has been an absolute pleasure spending time with you today. I hope you'll come
Same.
back and do it again because we could easily turn this into 2 hours if we
We
wanted.
could. We could. Thank you so much, Max, for having me on, and it has been an absolute delight. I find that you always challenge me to think better and harder. And yeah, let's do this again.
Wonderful. Let's do it.
Okay.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
Okay. Thank you.